So one book I read that was really interesting is the book Submission by Michel Houellebecq. I cannot pronounce the fucking name for the life of me. Basically, it is about a professor in France, in contemporary France, a few years. Yeah, the professor, his name is Francois, and his entire life is essentially a meaningless pablum of nothing. He's basically a decadent liberal who has completely given in to just hedonism, and he doesn't really stand for anything. And I can't tell if this reflects the writer himself, but I get the impression it does. Because I took a look at one of his other books, and it's literally just sex, sex, sex. Like the entire book is just sex. Now, this book Submission, it has a few sex scenes which are pretty graphic, but it's not like the focus of the book. It's maybe like 5% of the book total. So I get the impression that that's the perspective he's coming from. Like he's basically him, and like the character seems very much an avatar for himself. Uh, Kind of like a libertine, hedonistic, liberal perspective. And Francois, he takes a trip to a monastery where he essentially tries to find religion. He tries to find God, but he just can't. No matter how hard he tries, he can't. And it's the same with trying to find love with these women in his life who rotate in and out of it. He can't find it. And it's just there's this hollow hole in his life. And there's a hollow hole in the nation as a whole because France is a country and Europe as a whole, but especially France, it surrendered to secularism and all this like hollow bullshit like 200 years ago. It surrendered to it long before the rest of Europe. And that's why in France you still see like there's that Gothic cathedral they just bulldozed to build a town square. Like I couldn't picture that happening in many other countries. Like I could not see Portugal or Italy doing that. Um, it really goes to show just how much France is fucked. Like you merely adopted the degeneracy. We were born into it, molded by it. We didn't see religion until we were already men. By then, it was only annoying. Like that's basically the French spirit right there. Like they were the kind of the pioneers of this shit. And it makes sense that they are the nation in Europe that is probably the most fucked right now. And basically what happens in this book is that the narrator um, Francois, he ends up as a condition to be readmitted into the university to get a better job, he has to convert to Islam. And they promise that because there's this Islamic takeover happening in the country. It's very funny because they do a whole good cop bad cop thing with the so-called moderate Muslims, the ones who they'll pour the oil on you, but they won't light the match. It's they give the match to someone else to light it. It's just a good cop bad cop routine going on between the Muslim Brotherhood, who are like the legitimate political power, and then these like random terrorists who are just blowing shit up and shooting people. And there is a scene that's eerily reminiscent to the 2015 Paris attacks. Like they just describe it going on in the distance, like oh, there's all this gunfire in the distance on the streets of Paris. I think it's even like a similar part of Paris to where the attacks happened. And the scary thing is this book was actually released the day of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. So it's a very prescient book. Like a lot of what's happening probably will happen in France soon unless the nationalists win. Well, actually, what happens in this book is the nationalists are defeated. They get defeated by the fucking conservatives who side with the Muslim Brotherhood instead. And I could see that happening in real life, just like fucking Glenn Beck supporting Hillary Clinton. Like, ugh. I, this book, what's depressing about it is this is not Harold Covington's The Brigade. This is not the Turner Diaries. This is not a book where the white man is gonna, pick up arms and revolt. It's not even Camp of the Saints where the white man, picks up arms and revolts and in the end is defeated, but at least still tries. No, 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 no. This, as the title suggests, this is a book about complete surrender, submission. This book is very depressing, but it should be because I think what this book is essentially it's a cry for help. it's a liberal saying, just help us. We're fucking hopeless. We're so hopeless that we would convert to Islam because our lives are so hollow and because we can't form any kind of meaningful opposition to it. We don't have an alternative, you know, like the French Revolution and the World War II took away their alternatives. It took away everything they believed in beforehand, everything that France used to be, the old monarchy, the old culture, like everything about it is either dead or dying. And it's sad because France is a nation with a very rich history. And, you know, I mean, a lot of their architecture still exists. A lot of their art still exists. There's a lot to love in France. Like there's a lot to be proud of if you live there, you know? But still there's this just disgusting sense of depravity that exists there. Like this lack of belief in anything. Like I'm not saying it necessarily has to be religion. It could be religion. It could be nationalism. It could be a lot of things. There's a lot of things that they could use to fill this hole that exists in their lives and in their country. And in the end, Islam comes along like the good cop and the good cop bad cop routine and says we're gonna fill this hole. And it's really depressing, but at the same time, it's like the very last lines of the book are I had nothing to lose, or I think, or like I would not miss anything, or something like that. It's like it's basically just saying how hollow his life was beforehand. And this book just shows how hollow the lives of liberals are. Like their entire lives are just like this fucking Thai takeout food and random sex. Although increasingly it's not even the random sex anymore because millennials are having less sex than previous generations. So basically it's just this hollow shit, and Islam, as shitty as it is, it offers something. It offers something to believe in. And this book just underscores why we need fucking European nationalism, why we need white nationalism, because it's something. It's something to believe in, you know. God is something to believe in too. If Christianity is it, then yeah, that's good too. Although it should be a form of Christianity that's not totally cucked. That's the thing. That's a problem with Christianity these days. Is like, you know, the church might as well be a university lecture hall. I mean, these churches these days are just raising money for bringing in Muslim Syrian refugees to displace themselves in Canada or in France or whatever country as the main religion, to hasten the demise of their own religion by bringing in Muslims who will convert Christians. Like that, we're not converting them, they're converting us, okay? It's not, ugh. Like in this book, like he's converted from liberal secularism to Islam, and it's essentially out of convenience, but it's also because his life was hollow before. And it's a very scary book. It's like, how can these Europeans live amongst all this beauty, like all these gorgeous cathedrals, these abbeys, these cities full of old buildings? How can they live amongst this beauty and feel so hollow? Like, I can understand the feeling of hollowness more if you live in like fucking North America and you're surrounded by strip malls and stuff like that. But in Europe, really? I mean, I guess it depends where in Europe because, you know, some parts of Europe were really damaged badly in World War II and just by stupid modernist development. But France, like Paris, I mean, Paris is a beautiful city, very well preserved. You know, like, I mean, ugh, to be that way if you live in a place like Paris, I just don't understand it. How can you live around that kind of beauty and feel apathetic about it? I just don't understand it, and it's sick. Like there's some serious mental sickness, and I've seen this when talking to French people. Like I've been on a few dates with French girls, and they're so they'll say things like when I mention the Muslims in France, they'll be like, "Oh, but there are bad people everywhere." Oh, fuck off. There aren't people who will go, you know, take out AK-47s and start shooting random people in the streets everywhere. That does not happen in Japan. That does not happen in South Korea. There are not bad people everywhere. No, it's an Islamic problem. It's an Islamic terrorist problem. Okay, that kind of shit does not happen everywhere. It's not like, oh, there's bad apples in every bunch. Yeah, there's bad apples in every bunch, but not every bunch has a bad apple that'll go out into the streets and just start shooting people and murdering people. Okay? No. A bad apple in Japan might be like some sleazy con man who performs like white collar crime, you know. It's not gonna be someone who murders people like in the streets, like in fucking Paris what happened last year. Um or what was like these people, they're so enamored with like the idea of the exotic. It's like who cares about the exotic? You look at what you have in France. You have all these beautiful buildings, beautiful artwork. Like what do these foreigners have to offer that could possibly equal or replace that? They have nothing to offer. They have like fucking shitty graffiti and what, kebabs? Who cares? You can make kebabs yourself. French food is good. Like there's lots of good French food too. Like I mean, their crepes. Some of the crepes I had there were amazing. I mean, like, ah, fuck. I mean, seriously. And this other French girl, I met her at a bus stop, and she was talking about, oh, she likes it so much more in Canada. I'm like, I've heard this actually from multiple French girls. They say like, oh, I'm like, why do you like it more in Canada? Like, oh, people are more tolerant here. They get along better. It's like, oh, we get along better. I wonder why. It's because, well, it's because the people they import to France are literally the worst of the worst. Like, I don't like the mass immigration in Canada, but at least we don't get literally the worst of the worst. And that's what France is getting. They're getting like the absolute shit tier, bottom of the barrel people. They're getting like, you know, basically thugs, rapists, and terrorists. Like they're getting people from the worst parts of the world. Like France did not colonize the better parts of the world. They colonized some very shitty areas. Okay, aside from Quebec. Quebec's awesome, but I mean, like they colonized like these really shitty parts of Africa, these shitty Muslim countries, just really shitty places that produce shitty people. And these people are not productive. There's huge ghettos forming in France. I would not be surprised if the actual crime rate in France is worse than in the United States. It felt more dangerous than the United States. Paris, in terms of its demographics, reminded me a bit of like a bad American city. Like what kind of city? Like somewhere like Washington D.C. or Baltimore or somewhere like that. Atlanta, that kind of vibe. I got that kind of vibe in Paris, like the dindus everywhere. And yeah, I mean not quite Detroit. I didn't say Detroit because that would imply like ghost town. No, it's not Detroit, but it's like one of those like Atlanta or Washington D.C. or whatever. I got that kind of vibe in Paris. Chicago, yeah, that would be a good comparison. um yeah, Chicago is probably the best comparison. Ugh. Yeah, but seriously, going back to the book, yeah, it's a good book. It's depressing. There's parts that are plotting, like there are parts that could have been completely cut out. Like there was a subplot with his parents that doesn't go anywhere at all, where he visits, I think, his mother after his father dies or something like that, and talks about their estate, and it's completely pointless. But I mean, it's a small part of the book, but I mean, it does plot, but that's just kind of the style of writing. It's a very literary style of writing, a very European French style of writing, and it's like, it's slow burning, it's very introspective, but it's an interesting book. It's an interesting portrait of a dying society, a society that has nothing to lose, nothing to miss, and it's just like it's sad because it's like these people have lots to lose. Like look at all the beauty that exists in France. Like they have so much to lose. They have so much to be proud of. They have so much to build their identity in. I mean, France is luckier than some countries in that regard. Like fucking Germany, they got the shit bombed out of them in World War II. Like poor Germany, like France is in a much better state in that regard. Like they have much more of their heritage that's still intact. So I mean, it's really the problem in France is psychological more than anything. There's something wrong in their heads. There's something very wrong in their heads. I think it dates back to the French Revolution, and I think they need to get their shit together, or else they're going to be the first Islamic caliphate in Europe.